All right, Robert, you ready to roll? Let's see. I see you.
Yeah, I don't have anything to share, so you're
Okay,
just
you're
gonna be
gonna
able to
be,
get a see my face and
yeah. Well, I'll introduce you. I have your bio here, and the bottom line is, you're really good at what you do. I'm looking at everything that you've got here for everybody to know. My relationship with Align Dental Partners on the DSO side is just such a good group of people, and I met Robert through working with Dr. Alex Giannini, Chris and John McClure. They're friends of mine. They're really really good people, and Robert does amazing work for them, as well as all over the country. He's focused his practice on transactional matters, across state lines: private equity, mergers, acquisitions, venture capital, private debt, equity financing, day-to-day counseling of companies. His experience includes industries all over all stages of development: consumer products, manufacturing, technology, life sciences, and of course, dental. He's counseled dental service organizations and DSOs, dental support organizations, and been in the dental space for years. He's worked throughout the United States with DSO formations, business structures, related combinations, and restructurings, as well as other aspects of dental operation. He's a trusted advisor and known as a practical problem solver, and not to mention he's very funny. So I, I love his sense of humor and the wit he brings to the knowledge he has. When I talked to Paul, I was like, I've got to get Robert in here so that we can talk direct to a lawyer, somebody who knows the ins and outs of all of this, all that we're talking about and considering for our visions for transition. So, Robert, thank you so much for joining us, and the
Hmm.
mic is yours.
uh yeah, let me get my screen so I'm working good. Okay. Yeah, so my name's Rob Marchant. I'm a partner at Benish Friedlander. Uh we have we're headquartered in Cleveland, Ohio. We have operations in San Francisco, Chicago, Columbus, Delaware, but mostly that's for bankruptcy. So hopefully none of you guys ever have to talk to me about that. But and then we have some offices across the country as well. We have about 300 or so lawyers at our firm. One of the things that kind of sets our firm apart as opposed to other firms is that we have a dedicated healthcare and regulatory group. So they're kind of in the regulatory weeds on a daily basis. So some of the larger New York firms and even New York firms and some of the other larger firms across the country, they don't even have that expertise in house. So they kind of farm that work out to us. And so it's nice that if I have an issue on kind of a regulatory issue on the state side, I can just go ask my colleague as opposed to, having to call some other lawyer at some other firm to do that. I've been practicing for over 20 years. I'm a traditional M&A lawyer, so I help people buy and sell businesses, and we're also trying to be a green country firm, so my lights always turn off. But with that said, I've been practicing for over 20 years, and I help people in all different industries help buy and sell companies. Probably 8 or 9 years ago, I started to do more in the dental space. I think we rolled up 38 practices in one day. And then we flipped it to a private equity fund on that same day as well. Larger DSOs are backed by private equity. So there's just a different way that they kind of view the world and look at the world. Um, I don't necessarily think it's a bad way. I know that, sometimes people look at DSOs, for instance, and they think they're terrible. I actually don't. I think that creates uh, it creates a better environment for the patient in my mind, because the doctor can do what they do best, which what they've been trained to do, which is to fix teeth and do those types of things. And the other people can do what they do best, which is finance, HR, accounting, billing, and collections, and so forth. so the doctor can focus most of their energies on, like I said, doing what they do best, as opposed to doing some of the things that you probably don't like to do as a doctor, like hiring and firing and those types of things. So I was asked to kind of talk a little bit about, I guess the process, and whether or not you can go about doing this without a broker. What I would just say this, and I'd say this even if David was on as well. I think if you're going to go and engage the services of a broker, I think you need to really make sure you're getting what you're paying for. So I have seen all too often. I haven't done anything with David's group that I can recall, but I've seen all too often that the broker gets engaged, and I don't ever have any interactions with them representing the buyer. And they just sit back. They really don't do a lot other than that initial matchmaking, because they put, a for sale sign up essentially on the web and somebody connects. And then they walk away with 10%. That's a lot of money to give up, I think, if you're not getting the type of services that, David, some of the services David was talking about are the types of services that I don't see being provided by some of the brokers that are out there in the industry. And then they get, like I said, they get 10% for, setting somebody up on a blind date, essentially. I don't like that. And I'm not afraid to say it. I guess, like, when I kind of look at the landscape of the broker services that are available to dentists, it's interesting because it hasn't evolved, if you will, kind of in the private equity fund. You realize that if you sold a business in the private equity world and that business could sell for $200 million or $300 million, what do you think the percent that you're going to be paying on that sale price? Does anybody know?
One.
You might be paying 3%. And that's a sale that's $200 million. And that's a sale price, a sale where they've may have spent 6 months marketing that business for you, where they put together a 40 or 50 page circular about your business, where they've gone through all your financials and they've done all that stuff. And they're getting 3%, 4% for a sale. And in the private equity realm, I'll tell you that, like, sometimes the engagement letters are, and I haven't seen this in the dental world yet. I think it's probably because those that are benefiting from it don't want to introduce a concept like this, but usually in the private equity world or investment banking world, there's a fee for a layup, right? And then there's the fee for a grand slam. So I'm not sure I should pay somebody, for a layup. If I ask Eric to play basketball with my 5-year-old son and I'm going to pay him if he wins that contest, that's not much. I mean, it's an easy thing for him to do. Likewise, if I have $1 million in sales, my revenue is $1 million, and I got a single location, the data out there is going to tell you you're going to get about 75% maybe of that. So if a broker can't get you something more than 750,000 for that, then what are they providing to the process that makes it worth paying them $75,000 in that example for their services? So that's all that I would caution. So I would say that there's 3 types of brokers out there that I've seen. There's the broker that makes the introduction and it's a blind date. They connect the two, and then they don't do a lot afterward.
Then you're doing everything at that point as a lawyer.
Well, there's roles that are being played, yeah. But yes. And then there's kind of the true broker that kind of goes out there and does like the business analytics and maybe helps add value, tries to help underwrite the deal, find financing and stuff. There's that. And then there's also kind of a new kind of group that's kind of doing more consulting services that help somebody walk through the process of a sale on more of an operational perspective, and they're out there too. The ones that I know are on this side, on the where they're kind of doing consulting, operational assistance on an acquisition or sale. Their fees tend to be lower. The ones in the first two categories are about the same, but I think one you're actually paying for something, the other you're not.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
real quick, the one thing that we didn't let David get to was one thing that they do is actually find associates to place in your practice
yes,
as well. They also do that. So they are a very value based firm.
that's
I will
right.
say that. Yeah.
I can tell you when I was listening to what David talked about, those are the types of services that a broker should be providing if they're going to be paid a fee like that, in my
Mm-hmm.
mind.
Yeah.
If they are not providing those services, I I tell you, I just dealt with one today, and I'm just scratching my head that they received that much money for a sell side engagement because they absolutely didn't do anything other than make that initial match.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I would tell you that um, you can go ahead and do it yourself. It kind of just depends, right? So if I'm a buyer or even a seller, you got to make sure you're going to utilize all the resources that you have available to you. So if you're sitting there and saying, I want to sell or I want to buy, I want to expand and buy another location, or maybe I want to sell, like how am I going to do that? Let's say you decide that you're not going to go to broker route. How am I going to do that? Well, utilize all the resources you have. Think about some things that you have at your disposal that can help you out. So, um, what about the dental supply people that come to your offices? They're coming around to all the other offices as well. You don't think that they're hearing about things or finding out about things? Ask them. Let them know. Hey, I'm looking to acquire a practice. If you go around and find somebody, let me know if they're interested in selling. Or it is a little dicey if you wanted to sell too, because you want to be a little confidential on that too, because you don't want everybody to know that you want to sell. But that's a little bit more of a challenge. But certainly on the acquisition side, use the dental supply people, the dental repair people that are coming to your place, the dental labs that you're using. You're all using the same ones in a similar location. They're all dealing with that. They hear, they see, utilize all those things. I have a client that I talked to that was able to cobble together a nice group of practices by doing that very thing. Talking to the labs and the people that you are servicing, and finding out that there's people out there that are looking to sell because maybe they might be getting a little older, wanting to retire, or maybe they're just done with it and they want to be done. There's all reasons for that, and I can tell you, by the way, what I've seen in the sell when the dental industry, as far as the selling and buying and selling since the pandemic, it's just been just as busy as it's ever been. And I think part of that is people have come to realize, I think there's a segment of the population that's scared. They're scared of another pandemic. What is that going to happen to me in my business? Am I going to lose my nest egg if I don't sell? So you got a bunch of people that are a little bit afraid of the next pandemic and worried about what that will be for their prospects of selling, because you've kind of built this for a retirement to some extent, right? So you want to make sure that you can sell it and have some sort of retirement. So because of that, there's a surplus of deals out there. I think at least there has been since offices have opened up. So there's a lot of opportunities if you want to be able to grow, and maybe growing is going to help you get to the next level of dollars and cents. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay. So utilize all those things. If there's local dental societies, join those. If you've got colleagues from dental school, find out. Maybe they want to buy. Maybe you can reach out to them. Maybe they've already sold. Um, Maybe they have people that might be interested in buying because they sold. Hey, I sold to this person. These people might be interested in expanding and buying your practice. Again, you could also do cold calling. I mean, the way I kind of look at it is it's a small community. The dental community that you live within, it's a small community. You know all the dentists in your city. You probably know them from various engagements, whether it be at the country club, whether it be at other events and other charitable organizations. Uh, Reach out to those people. Just ask, hey, are you interested in selling? I'm looking of acquiring a practices or two. Are you interested? nobody can ever be offended by asking a question like
Yeah.
that. So just go ahead and do it. It's not a big deal. You got to take some courage to be able to do it. But there's people that, if nudged, they would look at that opportunity to buy. And don't be afraid to ask every once in a while too, because circumstances change. People look at the world a little bit differently. If somebody told you no 2 years ago, reach out to them again. Things have changed. Um, Join, you got the state boards that you have, obviously register with the state boards, be involved in those things, join committees if there's committees available so you can kind of network yourself. Certainly going out to various industry events, the DEO, the ADSO, the AADGP, and some of these other things are nice ways to network and find people um, that are potential buyers or are potential sellers. The other thing too is utilize your other resources that you have. I don't know. I always recommend that if you have an accountant, it would be great if you had an accountant that knows dental, the way
A
dentistry works,
dental
but
accountant. Yes.
use your dental accountant as a resource as well. Say, hey, I'm looking to buy in something. You got any clients you think that might be interested? Maybe you could like make an introduction, or hey, I'm looking to sell. Do you got anybody you think might be interested in doing that? Utilize all those resources. Those are ways in which you can find targets. Those are ways in which you can find potential buyers as well. Now, like even mentioned, on the sell side, it's a little bit more dicey. You might want to be a little bit more confidential on that as to how are you going to talk to people. But there is there are a lot of resources and utility things to utilize out there if you really want to, and you want to be active. And then you could uh, you, you can be either be a buyer or a seller. So I can tell you that again. Sometimes I'm a little jaded with the bringing the brokers because I see this on the back end, right? You know, I kind of sometimes I see it and I almost want to adjust my legal fees to because it's nowhere near what we're
adjust
talking
them,
about there, and it's like,
adjust them
wait a
this
second,
way.
what's going on here? So um, I would say that you need to have a good advisor on any of this, whether it's an accountant. I think you need an accountant. If you don't have one, obviously you need an accountant. You need an attorney, I would recommend in doing this. You could have a broker, you not have a broker, it doesn't matter. But don't, but by the way, I wouldn't be afraid to negotiate with a broker about their rates. They say I want 10%. I mean, there's no reason why you can't negotiate and say, okay, I'll give you 10%, but only if my practice sells for a certain amount, or negotiate that. They may say no, but doesn't hurt asking to try to negotiate those things.
Yeah.
So I can tell you that one of the more frustrating things I have as somebody that's in the dental space is to work with somebody on the other side that is not in the dental space. I'd rather work with a very competent attorney, someone that's smarter than me, which is not that hard to find, but somebody that's a very competent attorney because it makes the process so much easier.
Yeah.
I just did a deal where I bought a practice from somebody who uh, their attorney was an estate planner. She had no idea what it meant she didn't understand what the corporate practice of dentistry meant. She didn't understand any of those concepts. She'd never done a deal. It wasn't very easy. It was more costly for my client because I was doing all the work. Uh, and I've also had instances where you work with people who their lawyer on the other side's a litigator. I can tell you this, in the practice of law, sometimes people think, hey, lawyers know everything and they can do everything. There is certainly a delineation between a litigator and somebody that's a transactional lawyer. If you're going to hire somebody and you can't find somebody in the dental space, you better find somebody that's a transactional lawyer. Because if you find a litigator, they're not going to provide you with the advice and guidance that you need. If somebody came to me and said, I want you to go to court and be a litigant and take the case to court, I would not do it. I would turn down the engagement. It would be malpractice in my mind, because I can't do that. I've never done it, never been in court. I've watched it on TV occasionally, but I would never do that. but I'm a transactional lawyer. I can do transactions of all shapes and sizes for all sorts of industries across all over the country and even internationally. I've done that and I can do that, but I can't go in the litigation space. So don't be afraid to ask your lawyer, like, when was the last deal you did?
Mm,
When was the last whatever you did? Have you done a dental transaction?
yeah.
And if they say, if they hesitate, then I think you got your answer. So make sure you find somebody that at a minimum is a transaction lawyer. Because David talked about something called market. Um, and it's a term that transaction lawyers use quite a bit. And market just is, this is just the way things are done in this industry at this time, at this moment in time. These are the terms that you get. This is what you're going to get if you go out and try to sell to anybody in the marketplace. For the most part, these are the terms you're going to get. Market changes based upon whether or not the sellers have an advantage or whether or not the buyers have an advantage or leverage in the marketplace. So on the last few years, it's been a seller's market. What does that mean? It means there are so many deals out there, not only in the dental space, that buyers are overpaying for that because they're fighting for it. It's not just happening in the real estate world, it's happening in the M&A markets in general. There's a lot of money out there.
Yeah.
These private equity funds and other people that are making investments have money set aside that they want to spend. They have to spend that money. They're trying to figure out how to spend that money. If they don't spend that money, the people that give them money will say,
What are you
you're
doing?
not utilizing my dollars for my benefit. I'll go find somebody else that will utilize my dollars. So there's tremendous pressure for people to spend. And so there's a good market out there for sellers. And so in that case, what does that mean? It means maybe like if there's an escrow, those escrows are small. If there's an earnout, maybe the earnouts are small. The cash at closing is higher. The terms of the deal are just better. And Eric, you had a question,
Yeah.
or we just had
No,
a
I mean,
fly or something?
yeah, both. I'm agree. I have a question for you. Is that why in the last maybe 5, 6 years, we've seen practice valuations go from 60% to more like 75,
Yeah,
80%? Yeah.
it's for a couple of reasons. There's more buyers out there, and those buyers have to compete whether or not you like it or not. They're competing with some of that private equity money out there, some of the
Mm-hmm.
DSOs that are backed by private equity money. Because by the way, DSOs, you know how they grow? They grow by buying practices. Sometimes they're buying a group practice, 3 or 4, but our DSO clients that we have, we're buying single solo practices. We're so the buyer is a DSO, but we're buying, our target is a solo practice. And so you not only have solos that are buying other solos, you have the DSOs that are buying the solos. So you've got a lot more people that are coming there knocking on the door saying, I want to pay you some money. And so it drives prices
It's
up a
healthy
little.
competition with the DSO offering more money. It means the owner's got to pay a little more for it too. I think that's
That's
a
right.
part of it. Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
I
That's
get
right.
it. Yeah, that's
So
great.
I'll take, look at, I'm getting tired of the lights. I gotta figure out a way to figure this out, but I
Hey,
may
get your
have to
exercise in today.
move a little bit more. But okay, so David touched on this a little bit, and if you guys have questions, please interrupt. Um, David touched about this a little bit. What are some of the things that I see on the sell side that you know are common pitfalls for the seller? So you got to get your house in order, and David talked about this a little bit. So you guys that are solos or you got a smaller group or whatever, um, you've been taught by your CPAs that run as much through the business as you possibly can, and let's run all that through the business, run it through the business, run it through the business. I don't have a problem with doing that. The problem that I have is if you're going to do that, you need to keep a bucket that is filled full of all those expenses. So when you get to a cell and they want to see your historical financials, that you can show the real value of your business and not the depressed value of the business because you ran your Mercedes and your Cadillac and your Porsche through your business. Okay.
Porsche. Porsche. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, Dr.
So,
Danner? Right, Dr.
yeah.
Danner?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, so, you know, businesses are either paid for on the cash flow that you have, or they're paid for on EBITDA. So you got to understand, what is EBITDA? That's your earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. So, your revenue and minus your expenses, essentially. You got to understand what that really means. And those expenses, all the expenses are not treated the same. And so David talked about this as sometimes the role that they play, which is, let's get to your true EBITDA. So what does that mean? It means that let's take out the non-reoccurring charges that I've done over the last like 3 years, and let's add those back to EBITDA. So you got revenue minus expenses, but hey, wait, some of those expenses are non-recurring charges, like I just built out a website, or I just bought a bunch of computers, or I did this, or I did that. I should add that back. They call them EBITDA add backs. I should add that back to my EBITDA, because those are not expenses that a buyer would typically be expected to have to incur after the closing. Likewise, you may be paying yourself $350,000 for doing management work. And I don't have any problem with you doing that. That's fine. It's your business. You're doing that. But if a buyer comes along, they don't need to pay $350,000 for somebody to walk around and fill out schedules or tell jokes and, do whatever you do, right? They are only going to, you can say, look, you're paying me 350,000. You don't have to pay that. You can find somebody to do what I'm doing for 125,000. So let's add back 200 and, or what's the difference, 225 or whatever. 125. I can't even remember my example I gave, but let's add that back. And so again, revenue, expenses, we've now added back the cost of what I do, because you don't need me going forward. You can find a cheaper alternative. Let's add back some of the other expenses, the computer, the website, those expenses. And then those other expenses that David was talking about, Costco and all this other stuff. No, there's no problem in doing that. But I see buyers or sellers leave money on the table because they don't understand EBITDA enough. And I know clients that do something called EBITDA coaching, and they coach people on how to understand and manage EBITDA, right?
Wouldn't that be Chris and John McClure?
Yeah, they do
Yeah.
that. They do EBITDA coaching, because
Mm-hmm.
people don't realize the money that they're throwing out. Okay. So if you're going to do all that stuff, like I said, keep a little bucket of expenses that you're doing. So I wish I could show you a video or a picture of what I have. My wife's got this little small business where she sells home decor, kind of like Chip and Joanna Gaines, Magnolia, whatever. And we've got it in the back of this barn that we have on our property. And she's got a cult following. She's got people that are coming all over to do this stuff. And, it's really to keep her off Amazon and keep her out of the shopping malls. To me, is why she does this. And she does a pretty good job on it. But at the end of the year, she just literally like has 2 shoe boxes and hands them over to me and says, here's my inventory expenses, and here's this, and like, do the taxes, right? So I mean, her revenue is not, she's only open up once a week, so like she might make 20,000 a year or something like that, maybe a little more, but it is literally like that. It's in shoe buckets and boxes.
Well,
So
then everything is probably an expense for her that she can run through her business, and therefore it looks like it doesn't make a lot of money, but she's living off of it.
yeah, at some point the IRS says this is just a hobby, not a business. So if you continue to do that, but I've evolved from getting one box that has expenses and the receipts from the cash register to now I get 2 boxes from her. So I get expenses and then I get receipts. So she's slowly and gradually getting a little bit better on her record keeping on that. But in all seriousness, if you're going to be selling, you got to make sure that you understand what EBITDA is, understand what those add backs could be. Otherwise, you're losing money. And by the way, if you are if you understand EBITDA, that this is a hidden, I call it a hidden gem for a buyer. You can come into a practice and you can look at the financials. You look at the same financials, and if the seller's not as savvy, you look at that and you're like, wow, they spend a lot of money on Costco. They spend a lot of money on this. They haven't even added back all this stuff. Look at this value that I've got just by going in and buying this practice because I understand EBITDA and the seller doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And this is not, you're not going into a business to try to help the seller on every aspect. Sometimes you're going in as a partner, so maybe you got to bring some of those things up. Otherwise, when they learn the secrets of the business, they might be a little upset that they didn't understand that before when they sold to you or became a partner with you. But those same things can also benefit you on the buy side.
Robert,
So
I tell people, I tell doctors, your P&L is for your taxes, for you to pay the least amount of taxes possible, but your overhead management is different from that. So I think
that's
that's kind of what you're saying.
that's exactly right. I'm not suggesting you keep like two books, one for the IRS and one for you know, the divorce lawyer, and then one for like the mob, right? But you got to
Yeah.
make sure that you understand the buckets and why the author of those financials, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're the same numbers, they tell a different story.
Right.
So I have $1,000,000 in revenue. I have $800,000 worth of expenses. Got a profit margin of 20%. They sell a different story. When you look at those numbers, you might actually find out that the 800,000 is more like 6 or 7. And you
Mm-hmm.
got a profit margin of 35% as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
20.
That's
When you
right.
look at all the things, because like, don't get me wrong, I there's no doubt that everybody in this room has been told you can funnel a whole bunch of stuff through your business. It's great. That's what's great to have a small business. You can buy a truck, whatever. My buddy just bought a Hummer in December because his accountant told him, you buy a Hummer in December, you can write it all off on your taxes because it's like a truck for your business.
Over
So he went and
6,000
bought a
pounds.
Hummer
Yeah.
sitting in his garage. I don't even know if he's driven the Hummer yet, but he's got the benefit of buying that Hummer because he paid less taxes. He was able to do that. So in any event, that's one of the kind of the pitfalls I have. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is let's figure out kind of realistically what your value is. So if you're a solo practice, and this just rule of thumb, it may be right, may be wrong. If you're under like 650 to 700,000 as far as top line revenue, then you're going to be making on a sale. Most likely, it's like it could be as low as 50%, although the numbers are higher. Your 50 to 75% of your top line revenue is what you're going to be making, and that assumes that your your um your profit margins around 20% or something like that, right? So that's like a healthier company that's not got a ton of, like Paula said, a ton of overhead that you're going to have to come in and like really cut back on in order to make it a profitable venture, right? A buyer, by the way, they don't want to have to come in and slash and fire people and make a bunch of changes to a business because that hurts morale. That does a lot of things to it. So they're hoping that it's kind of got the regular profit margin that you'd expect to have, and then they may have to, you know, cut some things. But the other thing you could do is make sure your practice has lights that turn off if nobody's ever moving. You can save on electricity. It's just a super thing to do. But anyways, so if you're under like 650, you're thinking like, let's say 75% of your top line. If your revenues are somewhere between 650 and like 1.2 million or something like that, now you're actually getting into the realm where you actually can get a multiple on your EBITDA. Again, let's assume your EBITDA is 20% in this case. If you are between, let's just call it 700 and 1.2, then you're probably going to be getting like, you could be getting as high as 3 times EBITDA, 3 to 4 times EBITDA, depends on it, right? So when we talked about all those trips to Costco or the trips to Starbucks to buy, I don't drink coffee, so I don't know. I've been told like a coffee at Starbucks is like $5 or $4.50, but if you're going to get a 3 times multiple, then now your coffee is $15. every time you've gone to Starbucks and you charge it through your company, it's really a $15 cost of coffee because of the multiple that you can get on a sale.
So,
So then if you're a solo practice, okay, I'm
well,
sorry.
just real, no, I
Are you,
think,
you
yeah.
offended by my Starbucks comments?
No,
Or
I don't drink coffee
okay.
either. So let me ask you this. So if you knew that DSO, EBITDA, selling your practice was where you're going the next 2 years, you could stop running things through your business, maybe pay more in taxes to then get more value for your practice,
No,
or
no, no, no. I say you just keep track of what you're doing. The problem is people
okay,
aren't keeping track of what they're doing. They're
okay,
going to they're going to Starbucks and I'm going to charge it on the company thing. Or,
got it.
maybe they got a party planning committee at at their dental office, and so they buy a cake and whatever and they pay for it by that. Or they have all these other things that they're running through the business. They're just not keeping track of it. So if you can keep private equity guys are smart. They're educated. They know numbers. They know how to do this. They also know what EBITDA is. They also know what an add back is. If you go to somebody and say, look at all these things, and you can explain all that to them, they're going to understand that. They're not going to challenge your add backs to EBITDA because you're going to say, look, I mean, I was a solo practitioner. I went to the country club. You're not going to pay for my country club after closing.
My
So
car.
let's write this back, or my car. It's not that you're spending the money, it's that you're not keeping track of the money.
I got it. Thank you. Okay.
So then if you're above like 1.2 million your top line revenue, you're now talking to 4 and 5.5 of EBITDA. So for every dollar, it's now times 4. Now, I don't know how many of the here are kind of in group practices. If you're a group practice, then it's really like, the thresholds are like 5 million of top line, 10 million of top line, and 10 million plus, right? And it goes from 4 to 5.5 if you're at 5 million, 5 to 10 it's like 5 to 7, and above 10 you're getting like 6 to 9 maybe on your EBITDA if you're kind of a group practice, is kind of what we kind of are seeing in the marketplace. Now things change a little bit, but that's kind of what you do. And when I talk about EBITDA, I'm talking about adjusted EBITDA, which is the EBITDA number that you had plus all the add backs that we're adding back.
What looks like your profit left over at the year, but adding back these expenses that aren't really recurring. And
that's
that
right.
creates a number. So if your profit at the end of the year looks like 250, it might really be 350 or
400.
400. Yeah.
It depends upon what you're doing, but it's likely a lot more.
Would you say if I had 3 friends and they were all dentists and we lived in the same area, we were all the same age, and we thought, you know what? Let's create a group. I don't really want to quit dentistry that badly. I want to just slow down. Would you say it's a bad idea or a good decision if they wanted to form a group and create their own DSO and then 5 years from now sell it? What would you say? Oh, that's a really, really bad idea? Or you say, oh, there's possibilities there?
I do a lot of that. So you can combine practices and you should be able to do much of it on a tax-free basis.
So if your brother was a dentist, but you didn't live in the same exact town,
doesn't matter.
Okay.
That's actually the practice I worked in. They did this back in the 80s when it wasn't like known. People looked at them like you're weird. There were 3 dentists, had their own practice. They came together under umbrella of a corporation or whatever, and they maintained their individual practices under that umbrella in one building. They all came together in one building, so they shared the overhead of one building, maintained their individual practices, but were combined in a partnership.
Yeah, so I had a group in Washington that one of the main reasons they got together was they were getting squeezed by the insurance company with the reimbursement rates. And they were like, this is not good. And every year it was going down and going down and going down. And so they finally decided let's get together. And so they got together and we formed a group, and now they've got purchasing power and leverage with those same insurance companies. So when the insurance companies came to them again, they went to them and said, look, I've got X amount of patients. You want to turn your back on this type of business or not? And so they were able to leverage the right reimbursement rates on that. I can tell you, by the way, Well, I don't want to get too far off the path, but I tell you, I do a lot of that right now where people are combining on a tax-free, for the most part, basis and forming a partnership, whether it's across a number of state lines, it really doesn't matter. And they're trying to build up a critical mass so they can exit. And they're building up a critical mass by building a solid foundation, which is what you need. Private equity, if you're going to exit to a DSO or private equity fund, they want a solid foundation. They want a foundation that works, and they want to see that you can perform under whatever you've set up, repeat a year over year for a couple of years, and then you go to them and say, look what I've done. All you have to do is take over, and this is easy for you to do it. So I do a ton of that work. There's value. I've already told you the value of being a group as opposed to a solo, right?
Yeah.
It takes a little bit of revenue to get up to where your EBITDA, but then if you're under 5 million, you're now at 4 to 5 times EBITDA, perhaps, on a sell side. That's a lot. And you could get that by combining 4 to 5 practices. You can get to those numbers. And then, but I'll tell you the other thing, and I just gave a presentation on this as well. And there's a lot of cliches out there, but I'll just tell you, if you're going to go into partnership with somebody, you got to approach it like a marriage situation. So don't get enamored by the initial introduction and the initial look-see. Make sure that you date a little bit, so you really understand who you are, because you're really becoming a partner with them. So don't just get enamored. I know Eric has that problem. People look at him and they're just stunned by the way that he looks.
Okay.
He's got a real problem with that.
Yeah.
But his problem was not that. His problem was, so in any way, you got to get to know the person on what their personality is like, not just what their looks are and what they present.
Yeah.
And once you do that and have had enough interactions with them, then you can form a kind of a partnership like that, and you can do that. If you don't date enough, there are marriages that last where you don't date a lot, but I would say that if the more you know the person that you're married, the better off you probably are. And the same would be in any business relationship.
I agree.
So
totally agree.
you
Melinda's
can
got
add
a
a lot of
question.
value.
Melinda's got a question here.
who's
Melinda,
got a question?
unmute yourself, Melinda. Let's hear what you have to say here.
Okay, Robert, real quick, I'm sorry to have you to go back over this again, but on the breakdown of the multiples on EBITDA for, say 1.2 to go on up from there, what were the multiples on that?
If you're a solo and you're 1.2, it's probably like 4 to 5 times EBITDA, perhaps.
You're talking about total collections being above 1.2, right?
Yep. 20% margin.
Yep. As long
So
as
your
you're
EBITDA is
over,
at about, in that case, your EBITDA is probably 20% of that. So your EBITDA is probably 500,000, 400,000. Then you're probably going to get 1.6 or so for the business or more.
and if you flip that and you go, oh, people are getting 75% valuation on a practice, it's 1.2, they're getting 900,000 for the practice. So that's what you're comparing to. And so your lifestyle, your vision, your personality will determine what path you want to go. Both are great paths depending on, do you want to go lay on the beach, or do you want to keep practicing dentistry but not have the headache of managing and just focus on clinical dentistry like Rob was saying? So
and I would also tell you, like, the more revenue and the more EBITDA you have, it's easier for a buyer to finance that, right? So David talked a little bit about this, but people a lot of times are borrowing money to buy your practice, right? So they've got to convince a bank, a third party, to give them money in order to buy your practice. It's a lot easier to convince a bank to lend you money if there's more margin for error, right? Like, I've got a practice of this, I've been generating X, and so you're a little bit more bankable. If you're more bankable, then it's easier for them to get money, and they could even get turns on EBITDA, right? I mean, like, private equity world, what they actually do is they put, they might get 2 or 3 turns of EBITDA, and they only, they might buy something at 8 or 9 times EBITDA. This is outside the dental space, let's say, but they may buy something 8 or 9 times EBITDA, but they're borrowing 3 or 4 times EBITDA, and they're only putting 5 of their own. So they're making money off somebody else's money. That's That's the beauty of banking, right? If you can make money off somebody else's money, how you do that. So the reason the prices I think go up a little bit too is you're in a different market, people, more buyers, so there's more pressure, uh, pressure to be able to get the right price, right, for the buyer. And then you also are more bankable, right? And so as that happens, it just goes up more uh, dramatically. Does that answer your question, Melinda?
Yeah, I
I
think
can't hear very well on my right ear, so I can read lips. And I knew
Right,
she just said yes. So that's good.
it's good.
Okay, so let me say let's say you got a deal. What's going to happen, right? So now I've got a deal. I found somebody I'm going to buy. What am I going to do? I think you got to hire an attorney, talk to your accountant, find out about this. So David talked a little bit about this. Things that you got to think about are like purchase price allocation. What are they going to allocate to equipment? What are they going to allocate to goodwill out of that purchase price? Um, if if they allocate too much to equipment, you could have what's called depreciation recapture. So you're paying ordinary income on that. Buyers of a practice want to put a lot of value on the equipment and the hard assets because then they could get what's called a step up in basis. So they can start off at whatever they allocated to you and depreciate from there. Or, and that could be a depreciation in 1 year or depreciation over a number of years. So you got to think those things through. Those things have tax ramifications. The way you structure a transaction could have a ramifications for you on a tax side. So think about those things. By the way, if you guys are C corps now, I mean, you're going to have to like realize that if you're a C corp, like you could have double taxation based upon certain structures. But if you're a C corp, you might have already like there's not a lot you can do to reduce that tax burden that you might have if you're a C corp right now. So, I mean, it's just unfortunate news, but like you can structure things in a way perhaps to have the most tax advantageous way for you to do a sale, right? Sellers like to allocate to, you know, things that are not goodwill. I mean, things that are not ordinary income, right? They want, oh, I want it to be goodwill so I can, you know, I get a better tax treatment on that. So you got to think about some of those things. But one of the first things you do, you hire a lawyer, hire an accountant if you don't already have one. You get non-disclosure agreements with whomever the buyer is. If you're a buyer or seller, you got to make sure you have those in place. You get a letter of intent set up. A letter of intent really is just a term sheet saying I'm going to buy you for this or I'm going to sell to you for this. The key thing you need to keep in mind on a letter of intent, there's really only one provision or two provisions in a letter of intent, and this is not just uniform in the dental world. There's really only two provisions in the letter of intent that are binding. One is the confidentiality section of the letter of intent, and the second is an exclusivity provision that says I'm going to negotiate with you exclusively for 60 or 90 days. So that prevents you as the seller, prevents the seller from marketing that deal to somebody else to try to leverage your offer with somebody else. So those are the only two things that are binding. I don't care if it's a dental deal or if it's a deal for $500 million. When they sign letters of intent, that's the only two things that are binding. Exclusivity, confidentiality. Exclusivity you want as a buyer because you don't want somebody to shop your deal to somebody else. If you're signing letters of intent without exclusivity, I would tell you that's silly. Have your attorney put one in, look it up on Google, whatever, but you got to make sure that you're the only person in the game at that point. Otherwise, you could be wasting attorney's fees, accounting fees, and your time and energy. Then the day before you wanted to close, they could just go to somebody else. So make sure you have the exclusivity in there. Then you've got due diligence period. Whether you're going to be a buyer or seller, you got to think about these types of things. People are going to want to do probably some chart audits. They're going to do a lien search to see what are the liens on the assets of the business that I'm going to buy. What are the liens that are going to need to be released at closing so I can sell my assets free and clear? People are going to you probably search disciplinary records of the buyer or the seller, right? find out if they've been disciplined. You got to look at the associate doctor agreements to make sure that the pay scale that they have is consistent with what you want it to be. Is it collection? Is it production? What is that going to mean in the grand scheme of things if I buy it? What is it going to mean if I have production on this side of the business and I have collections on this side? So you're going to have to look at those contracts and make decisions on how you're going to want to do it. We talked about leases and make sure that you can take over the lease. The other thing, is this practice heavily Medicaid, Medicare? Those are big questions to ask. The bigger, the more and more that you have government receivables, the more and more risky it could be. And also the more and more you may close your ability to sell to the next buyer. There are some buyers out there that don't want to touch practices that have Medicaid, Medicare. They just don't want to be involved in it. There's too much regulation and too much of a death knell if you run afoul of it. So when you're looking at targets, that should be a question that you ask immediately. Realize that if you, and then, you know, how am I going to structure this? Am I going to buy the AR? Am I going to have, you know, are they going to be responsible for their payables up to closing? Is there going to be a working capital adjustment, or, you know, all of those types of things that could be there. I could tell you if you've got a bunch of government receivables, Medicare, Medicaid, realize you can't buy those. Not allowed to. It's unlawful to buy government receivables. So you would have to exclude them from the purchase. And if you, so that means if I'm looking for receivables to help the working capital after I buy the practice for 60 or 90 days, I'm looking for the collection of those receivables to pay the rent and everything. If you've got government receivables, it's a different story.
Can I ask a question about that?
No. Oh, yeah, of course.
What about VA? Because I see a lot of practices doing VA cases, and there's like a 3-4 month window or longer before those cases get paid, and sometimes it's like 50 grand or more. Is that also can't buy government receivables under VA?
Not allowed to.
Wow.
Not allowed to. You're not allowed to.
Okay. Good to know.
A buyer, you're not even allowed to borrow against them.
Oh.
So a lot of times when I go to the bank and I say I want to borrow money, the bank is going to say, what's your collateral? And I'm going to say, I have a practice that generates this amount of sales, and this is my average receivables, and this is my inventory. Sometimes banks will lend based upon a percentage of receivables and a percentage of inventory, maybe like 50% of inventory and 60-70% of receivables. So if I got $1 million of receivables and $1 million in inventory, I might be able to borrow $1.1 million at the bank, right? But if it's a government receivable, it's excluded. Now there's things you could do about that. You just can't buy them. You can't, once it hits your bank account, then it's fungible. Money's money. It can go wherever it is, but you actually can't take control and possession of those accounts.
Makes sense. Good point there, especially about the VA, because I have a lot of fee-for-service practices who are taking VA cases. So another question that comes into play here too that I've run into is, let's say, I mean, Delta Dental is the biggest insurer probably in the country, and you've got a senior doctor who's on the Delta Premier, and you've got someone that's going to buy the practice is going to be on this rate with Delta, and it lowers the price of the practice because they cannot collect all that money from Delta. Is this what you run into?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So when you buy a practice, so the purchase agreement, when you buy a practice, at least the ones I do, which, you know, I try to button up, you know, make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. But you got a purchase and sale agreement, you got a bill of sale, you got an assignment assumption agreement. Purchase and sale agreement's a pretty big document. Bill of sale, assignment assumption agreement are a couple pages. You got an IP assignment agreement. You got a patient records and custodian agreement. You have a restricted covenant agreement, which, by the way, if you're a seller or a buyer, 5 years is the standard. Don't let anybody talk you off that. 5 years is standard non-compete if you buy somebody's practice. There's no question about that. You've got an employment agreement maybe that you might have with the seller. You have a transition services agreement, which you have in place as well. So let's talk about the transition agreement and let's talk about your question, Paul, at the same time. So we know that when we credential our dentists, and our agreement with Delta Dental says that the credentialed doctors are the only ones that are allowed to do the work underneath that EIN number that you have with Delta under that provider agreement. So invariably, the problem arises is that when you buy a practice, and unless you're buying the stock, and even if that, it's like tied to the practitioner, it's not tied to the EIN as much. But the problem that could arise is that now you've got to re-credential everybody under Delta. And when you go to Delta Dental, they're not going to give you the rate that you had previously grandfathered in. So the thing to consider is that there's two things to consider on that. One is that is an immediate loss of a certain amount of revenue. So you might, if you're savvy as a buyer, you have to recognize that if I go and I'm no longer going to get this reimbursement rate, I'm going to get this. You have to factor that into your planning.
Yep.
The thing that lawyers have done to try to get around the requirement that only licensed dentists under that provider agreement that are credentialed can do the work is that we've created this transition services agreement that basically will say, well, the new practice is trying to get credentialed. The old practice is still going to work. They're going to be working at our location using the new practice's employees. We're going to allow them to use their employees, and those are the same employees that were there previously. They're going to be basically doing work under the old provider arrangement until such time as I get my credentialing in place. And then they're going to bill, and they'll assign the collection over to the new practice. So that's how you can not get around it, but at least for a temporary basis, so you don't have to halt production. Because if you didn't do that, you could do a whole bunch of work for patients that are Delta Dental. You just have bills that are stacked up, and then when you get it credentialed, you can send those in. But yeah, I see that all the time. I see Delta Dental just sending letters to clients telling them, you're now going from Premier to this. I see them. They're kind of using that whole 800-pound gorilla approach that they have. So they're so large that they're really utilizing that and putting the pressure. That's why, some of these if you can group up and get the leverage, you might have the leverage that you need with Delta as opposed to being.
Maybe you know the answer to this, Rob. I'm not sure if you do, if this is too specific, but father is practicing Premier. Son comes in as associate. Doesn't matter. Just associate comes in. And on the insurance claim for Delta, it'll say rendering provider and billing provider, like they're two separate things. Can you legally have the associate bill under the Premier billing provider, even though they were rendering the services, and they're at a network with Delta? Could they come under the umbrella of the senior doctor as a billing provider, and even though they weren't the service provider on the claim? There's like two sections on that claim form. It could say like Dr. Senior is the billing provider, Premier rate, but Dr. Junior was the one who actually did the services, and he's not in network. Pay us Premier. Do you know anything about that?
No, I mean, I'd have to look to see if you can do it. I mean, like I said, your arrangements with Delta Premier said these are the credentialed dentists that are allowed to bill under this. And so the more you kind of monkey with that, then the worse off you're going to be with those folks.
Got it.
So do the transition companies take this Delta thing into consideration when they value the practice? Do they lower the valuation because of this Premier PPO fee deal?
You could. People have done it. If you're really savvy, that's what you do. You go to them and you factor that in. Now you've got it look, the purchase price is what a willing buyer is willing to pay and what a willing seller is willing to sell. So, it's delicate. If you have the data to at least support it, then it's least supportable, right? But at the end of the day, it's what you're willing to pay, and what a seller is willing to sell. So, it's just, to me, it's like when you make these decisions, you got to make the decisions with the knowledge that you, with
Mhm.
with the full knowledge. So
Right.
let me just take a step back. I get introduced to groups that are either I want to get together and I want to do this, or I've already got 7 locations or whatever. What
Yeah.
can I do? And I get this. So what I notice, and there's nothing wrong with this, I'm not making fun of anybody when I say this, is that a lot of times when I talk to some of these dentists, they don't have a plan,
Mm.
and they've never sat back and had a plan. They just buy, oh wow, the place in Woodstock, Georgia is for sale. I'm going to buy that place. So I'm going to go out and buy it. I'm going to form a company. I'm going to go buy it. And then, oh wow, there's one in like Atlanta. I'm going to buy that too. And oh, I'm going to form a company there. And then there's one in DeKalb County or whatever. So you just do it. You don't have a plan. You have to have a plan. You have to have not only just a plan operationally, I think you need to have a legal plan. So
Yeah.
uh, I I don't know if you've ever seen the movie A Christmas Story, but it's a Christmas classic. At Christmas time, it's always on the news. The story I always love to tell about the Christmas Story is the following. The scene I love in that movie is when the son, which by the way was filmed out here in Cleveland. I can look out my window and see where they filmed the opening scenes. But the scene I love about the movie is the mom is sitting there and the son wants to go out and play in the snow. The mom puts on a coat, puts on another, there's a sweater, a coat, a sweater, another coat, puts on a hat, puts on a scarf, puts on gloves. And the kid's out there like this. Eric is doing it. He's got his arms out. He can't put his arms down because he's got so much going on. And he gets out and he walks out in the snow, and some neighbor boy pushes him down, and he falls in the snow, and he's laying on his back like this, and he can't get up. Now, did the mother not love the son? And is that why the mother did it? No, the mother loved the son and didn't want the son to get cold and wanted to make sure that there was no chance that my boy is going to get cold out in the weather. Sometimes I run into and I see structures and how people do things from a legal side, and I think the same thing. You have 10 different entities, you have 10 locations, you have 10 bank accounts that you have to manage, you have 10 different contracts with United, Concordia, or Delta because you've got 10 different EINs. Why do you do that?
Yeah.
Why do you need to do that? I'm of the belief that I can love my son by putting a nice warm coat on, one, and he can go out and play. So you don't have to do that. You have all this stuff. You created so much operational complexity to your organization by worrying about, oh, well, I got to do this because my lawyer said that I've got to protect my assets from this business, and this business, and this business, that business. That's all to me theoretical possibilities that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. The type of things that you guys are worried about in your practice are not the type of things you're going to be able to run away from by hiding under a legal entity. Oh, I didn't commit malpractice. That was that entity over there that committed malpractice. You can't come after me, come after that entity. Not going to happen. Now, there are some circumstances like maybe sexual harassment or things like that, if it rises to the level that you're running kind of like a locker room mentality in your practice, and like I can't help you on that, right? But I see that a lot. People that are just making things too complex. My preference, if I was in more than one state, let's say I'm a DSO or I'm a group. I'm not DSO, by the way, doesn't mean you're like North American Dental Group or Affordable Care or any of these things. DSOs, it just means that you're a group, that you're servicing other locations. But you only need one clinical location in every state you're at. You don't need a bunch.
Yeah.
You only need one management company, maybe one mothership, and maybe a management company in that state. You don't need to complicate it too much. And there's too much of that. I see so much of that. And to me, again, you're just putting too many coats on, and you're not allowing people to operate. I've got a client who does literally, and we've finally were able to help him. He had 10 bank accounts.
Whoa.
10
Yeah.
bank accounts because he had 10 different locations,
That's
10 different
right.
logins and passwords to get into said bank account, to look at his bank account. Oh, by the way, that bank was at the same bank.
Oh
So I
man.
have to log in, and I can't just see it all on one page. I have to log into all these accounts to check it all out. And
Yeah.
I've got 10 different banks at whatever my bank is. And I've got to do that. That's how I'm doing my banking. Like every day, I've got to like boom, boom, boom. I got to see it. I may have to move money from one account to the next. What a waste of time and resources this guy had to do just to move money from one practice to the next. Because
Yeah.
hey, I mean, sometimes collections are slow in one practice as opposed to another, and one practice may need some money to pay, rent or whatever. But in order for him to do it, he'd have to log into 10 different things and transfer them around. I mean, it's a waste of time and energy. So I see a lot of that.
Okay.
And, I wish that there could be,
Yeah.
the less and less time you spend on those, the more and more time you could spend on really doing the things that make money for you. And that's being in the mouth and being
Doing
a good
dentistry.
dentist as opposed
Yeah.
to like being a guy logging into bank accounts.
Okay.
Bob, thank you so much for
Yeah.
all this information. My gosh. I was
Wow.
texting Paula. I was like, okay, I'm learning today. This is getting me fired up again. I get passionate about all the different ways that you can, I think, lead your practice. And I know that we're just scratching the surface on your knowledge and the wealth of information you have for us, Rob. So I'm sure you're going to be getting some emails, and definitely from
Yeah, if
me.
you guys have a question, send me an email. Not charging you any money for answering questions. You're just utilizing my brain. It's no big deal. If you're a friend of Eric's, and I guess you're a friend of mine. So,
Hold it against them.
yeah. So reach out to me. I'm more than happy to kind of talk to you about different things. I've done this a lot. I know how to walk people through a transaction on the buy side and a sell side. There's not anything I haven't seen for the most part. I've got enough gray hair in my beard that I've done enough.
You've earned it. You earned your stripes. You just remind me of a question. If a broker fee is like 10%, what's just skipping the broker fee and using a lawyer like you to just manage a transaction for me? How does that typically work out?
Well, I charge by my hourly rate.
Yeah.
I mean, but I would there's no way let's see. 10,
It's like
let's
fraction.
see.
It's a fraction of the cost, right?
Yeah, let's see. Oh, I mean, I would imagine that our fees might be 1% maybe or less. I don't know. Like, there's a certain amount of stuff that you need to do no matter what, right? It doesn't matter how many zeros are at the end of the purchase price. So you have to go through a process and you got to do certain things, but it's not anywhere near that. And again, I'm not suggesting, don't get me wrong. I've run into some very good consultants, very good brokers that really provide a lot of value to the process. I can just tell you that if they're just getting paid for a layup, then I'm not sure what they're providing to you.
Meaning if you already had a buyer coming to you, you already found your buyer, or you know how to find a buyer because you know all those network things you talked about, why would you don't need to engage in that. Just go straight to the
if you already had a buyer, you'd be foolish.
Yeah.
If I already had a practice I was going to buy, or I already knew somebody I was going to sell to, I think you would be foolish to engage a broker. That just doesn't make any sense. A broker is supposed to find the parties and maybe get to the terms of the deal. Once that's there, I mean, and by the way, it's not like I'm a broker. I do this all the time, but I also know how values come in, and I know how the touch points on that. So, I know how to talk to people about where the money is and what it's about, and reading those letters of intent and stuff. I understand that. So like, once you're at that stage, I'm not sure a broker is, there's not as much value.
Well, and I think what you're saying too, as well, is how do I evaluate my practice? And you think you need to hire a broker to evaluate your practice when you really don't need that part, right? You don't absolutely need the broker. I mean, we could figure out the value of your practice is what we're saying.
Yeah. So Melinda, you just asked the question, what is it if I negotiate the sell? Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I negotiate everything on the sell side. So whoever my client is, if I'm buying a practice, I'm negotiating that purchase, and I'm negotiating every term on it. I'm the person that I'm your representative negotiating the terms on your behalf. And so if I'm on the buy side, the same thing. I'm negotiating the terms on your behalf. I can tell you this, most transactions though end up being between the 45-yard line. And I'm just a person that I don't think my client should pay me to get to the 45-yard line. If you tell me like I want to be like extreme on one side, out of market, way over here by my goal line, fine, I'll do that if you really want to. But then you're going to pay me to get to the 45-yard, and it's a waste. So you put together a transaction. I've done tons of these. Put together a purchase agreement that's fair, that's between the 45-yard line, less negotiating, less lawyer time,
Yeah.
less cost. You're not paying the lawyers to put on a show, but you're getting a deal done. Look, I'm a deal lawyer. I want to help people get the deals done. That's what I was trained to do. I'm a deal guy. I put deals together. I like to play that role. I like to negotiate and get the deals together for clients. I like to walk them through the process. I like to explain what these words mean, what these big words mean. I like to do that. That's something that I enjoy. That's just what I like about the practice of law. So yes, we come in as
You're
your
like
lawyer,
you're like the
negotiate
treatment coordinator in the practice and the dentist versus in between the dentist and the patient. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking
No,
the
I mean,
language.
that's what
Yeah.
I do. When I talked about me being a litigator, I can't do it. That's not my DNA. I'm not, litigators like to be like this, and they're constantly going at it. They're going after people's throats. That's the way that they're grown. That's the way they are. I'm not that. I'm just not. I'm a deal guy, and
Yeah.
I can't change. I
Thank
wanted to
you.
become a lawyer because of Atticus Finch, but everybody in law school did. But I can't go to the courtroom.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Robert. We're gonna do some aha moments and Q&A. So we're gonna stop this recording.